All right, Chris. Well, welcome back to the podcast. I think you're actually the only person that has had a spotlight 3 times now.
Wow, thanks. It's an honor and a pleasure every single time. I enjoy chatting with you, so thanks for having me back.
I do too. So when I was, looking at creating this Lease-Up series, I knew that there was going to be a spot where you and I were going to have this conversation. And in our emails back and forth, something I have just also noticed is you've really doubled down, and I've seen a theme emerge where you're kind of the leader in speaking about where lease-ups are going wrong in a phase that people are sometimes not even thinking. So the early lease-up development. Has that been an intentional thing that you've been wanting to talk about?
Yeah, I think so. It's grown. It's certainly grown over the years. It's funny you use the phrase "double down" because I think that we are intentionally talking more about it, just because in the work that we do, when it's not addressed, I think we see things slipping. We see lease ups going slower. We see things falling behind, and the main driver behind starting early ultimately is performance and better ROI for our clients and our partners. And so you're 100% right. I think the double down is there. And so I'd love to talk more about that if you have any specific questions around it.
Yeah, let's do that. So I think for a lot of people, maybe a timeline of like, when are we supposed to be doing what? I know some communities that are literally a month away from getting, their certificate of occupancy. And they're like, okay, we need to get on social. We need to do, and it's like, when should someone really hit the ground
Mhm.
running? Can we talk a little bit about the key first steps in your marketing plan?
Yeah. So if you think about it from start to finish and you think about the start is literally when shovels are hitting the ground and the end is call it, CO and people are moving in and things are, even if it's incremental, people are moving in and they're sort of making it their home. We like to think about it as soon as possible, getting your property activated, getting the fence wraps up on construction fencing, and getting things rolling in the first couple of months once construction begins. And so, I've had this conversation a couple of times in the last few weeks, ironically enough, and one of the timelines for one of the partners that we're speaking to, they're trying to get started in Q3 of 2024, and they're going to be launching or going live towards the end of 2025. And so if you draw that out linearly left to right and you think, okay, we're going to be starting in Q3 of 2024, well, what needs to happen at that point? What do we need to have designed and ready to go from a brand perspective? And for us, the answers are usually something along the lines of you need to have your name established, your brand developed, your positioning really well understood, and have a few ways to activate the property right away. And so Q3 is when fence wraps and construction stuff is happening. So let's dial that back a couple weeks. Let's backtrack, a couple months and say, well, let's get started in the summer, early summer of 2024, so that when Q3 hits and shovels are hitting the ground and construction is happening, we have at least minimally activated the property, right? That all is driving interested parties, the neighborhood, renters, and so forth to a splash page that is then gaining more of their interest or getting on a nurture list. At that time, we're probably also activating some social channels. Certainly, we're getting the email nurture campaigns rolling end of 2024. And that whole phase is sort of like just a design phase where we're sort of like the bell curve starts to swoop upwards, where we're starting to get things rolling. We're not all in yet, but we're very much in that early design phase. There then comes a phase that we think of as like the build phase. And so during the build phase, we're rolling out the larger website itself, floor plans are ready to go. We're doing on-site activations for thinking about interior activations for the brand once the property is further along. We're just kind of like more hands in the dirt at that point, and we're helping them build out the brand experience in that middle phase. And then I would say about 3 to 5 months, this is, depending on how big the property is, 3 to 5 months out, we're kind of in this scale phase. So the third phase I would think of is the scale phase before CO. And we are saying, okay, 3 to 5 months out, we're making sure that your paid campaigns are rolling, your nurture campaigns are at full speed ahead, everything's dialed in at your ILS levels and so forth, because we want to make sure that everything's coming along, full website, paid, et cetera, for those many months up until CO, so that your leasing team during that lease up phase is totally buttoned up and that velocity is at maximum capacity.
Okay, that's awesome to hear. It's just so much earlier than most people talk about. How are you getting people bought into this idea of
I
starting
think,
earlier?
yeah, no, it's a really good question. And what I've realized, and I would say what we have collectively realized over the years, is that money talks in this industry. And when you're speaking with a developer or an owner that's investing a lot of their own capital and they're pulling in and they're convincing other capital partners that this is going to work, obviously the pressure is on. It's a high stress environment. And so what we found is by doing the math for them and saying, hey, this is what we think that your marketing investment should be over this span of time, and this is what we estimate your lease up is going to look like. This is how long we think it'll take. This is how much you're spending. As opposed to if you were to not do any of this or piecemeal it or only rely on ILS for leads or so forth, it might take this long, which is usually quite a bit longer. And so we can backtrack down out of those numbers and say, this is what it would cost for us, but this is how much faster things will get done as compared to this second option. And usually that delta is pretty moving from an ROI perspective, and it starts the conversation and it makes the conversation about marketing investment a much more serious conversation because they know that we know what's at stake here. And I think that's really important from the marketing perspective. Marketing teams and marketing individuals need to have that in mind when they're speaking to these types of partners.
So is there anything else when someone is outlining a timeline that they need to keep in mind, whether it is like the main objectives, you kind of shared what those are for those 3 bullet points, or is there anything else in that timeline that maybe pitfalls that people can avoid?
I would say definitely make sure that you have considered a specialty team or a specialty partners. I think one of the things that we also talk a lot about is it's generally not enough to go out to a generalist agency or a generalist paid ad campaigns firm or a generalist XYZ and expect them to understand the nuances of the multifamily industry. And I think you probably know this, Barbara, you've probably seen it a lot. Um, there are groups that come to us that have made those decisions pretty consistently, and it's nothing that they did intentionally. I think they just were operating on what they thought was the best move at the time. And and yet multifamily is so specific and nuanced, and there's lots of sort of ins and outs to the industry that only specialized partners are going to understand. And so I always would say, at least vet out some of these specialized partners in the industry. If it's not a marketing team that does it all, work with one or two that can kind of cover most of the bases for you and that have a lot of experience in lease ups.
That's so great. And I actually love that newsletter you did where you shared some of those questions to ask and how to vet some of these agencies to know what partner is right for you. And I know both of us have worked in this space. You want to align with who you're going to work with. So, not everybody is the right fit, even for different agency partnerships. Have you found that to be true too?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I don't think that you feel like Sprout is the fit for everyone. I certainly don't feel like Authentic is the fit for everyone. But that being said, I think we both agree that these are individuals and companies that need to be educated on how to best onboard and select their partners. And so, what we can do as sort of multifamily marketing advisors is say, watch out for these things, make sure you ask about these things, and then make your decisions in a much more informed fashion rather than just sort of, scouring Google for the local paid ad agency, whoever that might be. I think it's really important to make sure that partners align with you if they're going to work with you, but even if they're not, at least equip them and make sure that they're more educated to make solid decisions for their lease up activities.
100%. I think too, like there's so many phases, like you talked about very early on, but then there's also once you're in a more stabilized place or you're trying to get the branding to the on-site team and you're trying to like get that vision. A lot of times someone outside of the industry doesn't understand that huge disconnect that happens from the developer marketing team to then on-site team. And so we're talking about the long haul on these projects. And I do think that's where that, kind of zoom out perspective that we have just because we work with so many people gives us that, that attention to knowing, ooh, this is a pitfall that most people are gonna hit, and here's how we can overcome it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You think about all of the little things that come up along the way, and if you have experience with those, if you've worked on dozens of lease ups over the last few years, then you know kind of what to expect. And I think a lot of these clients don't necessarily know those things that are incoming, and then suddenly it's too late, and it's triage mode, and there's an emergency or a fire drill. And I think it's really important for us to just push education and make sure that they're aware of things coming down the pipeline. The other thing I'll say that just came to mind, Barbara, is a pitfall that I see commonly is not thinking about your leasing team or your leasing liaison really enough. Because, going back to the top of the conversation, when we're thinking about all of those phases, they kind of like build up and pile up into this apex moment where, okay, we need to get people in, we need to start signing leases. And that velocity is, if that velocity is there, but your leasing team is not there to receive it, then there's a big problem. And so leasing teams are highly critical, and leasing teams, I think, that have sales experience as well are really important. Outside of bright personalities and great people, I think that you need to consider also having a leasing team that understands sales and how to close these deals, because that's obviously how you get a lease signed.
100%. That's such a huge thing that you just hit on. Is I think what is so interesting to me in observing is that the pitfalls are almost the same and everyone seems surprised by them. Where I think you and our philosophy is like, let's prepare, let's plan for them, because there's only this many pitfalls that there's going to be, right? Like there's a bag of challenges and you can mix them up in a different market, but they're kind of all, there's just a few, you drill them down to the basics. And I work with teams that are like, I cannot believe like this is what's going on. And it's like, guys, this happens every time, right? So
Yeah.
strategy and what we're talking about today is like, this happens. It's almost like in your plan, in your timeline. I almost think that's an extra thing, is you almost can outline, these are the pitfalls
Yeah.
for at these different phases.
Totally. Yeah, and I don't know why I just thought about this. Probably because before we came on the call, we were talking about my son and his projectile vomiting recently. But you think about you think about kids, and they're all going to have the same issues, right? Like they're going to have sleep regressions, they're going to throw up, they're going to be sick, they're going to have highs and lows. And there are going to be these moments in a lease up where it's very similar. Like you can count on things going wrong. And if you don't have experience with things going wrong, then you need to work with a partner that does understand what those things are going to be.
100%. When you said that, I was like, kids and you and I are business owners. It's like sometimes we'll get in the weeds, and my business partner and I are like, why are we here again? Why is this so frustrating? And it's like, oh yeah, because these are the same ones. They just get regurgitated at a different level, and you're
Mhm.
faced with them. So, well, okay, I want to go off on a really quick tangent before we wrap up. I know you have really strong feelings about banners and bandit signs and signage, and I always love when you kind of riff on that. Tell me about some of the biggest mistakes that you see when people throw up signage for, and I don't want to keep saying throw up, like this is no,
Yeah, it's a theme.
but tell me kind of some of your just like thoughts when I talk about signage.
Yeah, I'm not, and I'm not trying to be savage about it when I post about it, but it's just I just shake my head when I see these things out in the real world, and it's almost to the point where it just starts to feel comical, because we see so much in the industry about luxury this and granite countertops that, and it's like, yeah, but what are you doing that's differentiated from, the 50 other, apartments in your area? And so when I drive around town locally, or when I'm traveling and I see these signs up that just say, now leasing in like the default font that the print shop down the street was able to give you, I just shake my head, because it has nothing to do with, you know, dialed in messaging or positioning your brand or anything like that. And so, to me, and I'm biased obviously because I run a marketing agency in the multifamily industry like yourself, the biggest mistakes, number one, is just make your signage align with your brand. And that goes beyond colors and fonts and the logo itself, but like, what's the messaging? What are you telling people? Is it color coordinated? Is the sign sort of unique in its own right? Staying away from blank, kind of just now leasing, falling off of, balconies on the outside of apartments. Thinking about it in a little bit more, through a little bit more of an imaginative lens, I think, is just the number one thing. And then from there, sort of the nuances cascade downward. I think you can do a lot of cool things with signage, but definitely the biggest head scratchers are the ones where you can just tell it took a print shop 5 minutes to do it, and then they threw it up, and it's like, okay, well, there's nothing special about that.
Well, I love when you go savage on it. So keep on doing that. It's like when I get mad at, the luxury community that is absolutely gorgeous and you go into the elevator and then there's like a Comic Sans sign about this luxury event that they're having this weekend. And I'm like, guys,
Yeah.
it's like your words and it's nothing's lining up. It's like the words that are coming out of your mouth are not lining up with your messaging. So okay, Chris, I want to wrap because you're so good at what you do, you and your team, that you've recently come across kind of a problem slash, success. Can you talk about what happened with one of your clients?
Yeah, yeah. So, we talked about this linear process from start to finish. And one of our clients outside the Twin Cities, it's in a really small lake town, the land of the 10,000 lakes up there. They have a really beautiful luxury building that is under construction right now. And they really bought into what we talked about from kind of an early brand awareness and nurturing perspective. And they've been doing just so well that they ended up passing on doing a phase 2 full website build out with us because they're in such a good position for having things leased up for when they open this summer. And so we're still obviously at time of recording here, multiple months away from the summer. And they just kind of said, hey, everything is going really, really well. I think they're actually approaching 75% leased up already, and it's just kind of like, well, what are you going to do? So from a business perspective, we maybe need to figure that out. And that's not to toot my own horn or anything, but it's kind of a funny problem to have because I think it really gets at, when all the stars align and you do these things and you have a good product and you have a good location, then it really is that easy. It can work that well. And so it's kind of become a fun, funny banner story for us when it comes to this stuff.
Well, I think some of the best services offered sometimes work themselves out of work because it's either teaching their clients how to become better marketers, or in your case, helping them reach their goals faster and quicker. And I know, Chris, you'll brainstorm on, additional ways to add value to your clients. And when people hear this, I think it's going to be neat for them. First of all, I love this conversation. I think last time you and I talked, I love that we are in similar spaces. We both have agencies, different kind of clientele and different approach. And I love that we can, support each other. And there's things that Sprout doesn't offer that you guys are more equipped to offer. So can you talk a little bit about how you help maybe lease ups or rebrands to get those kind of results?
Yeah, I think we were chatting about this a little bit before we jumped on, and I think it's important to acknowledge that not every situation is a new development, ground up, luxury building. And I think what we're seeing now, 2024, probably 2025, is going to be a lot of repositioning of existing buildings. A lot of groups are acquiring older buildings and rebranding them, and so we're seeing more come to us that are struggling, they're falling behind with lease-up, or maybe retention is lagging behind. And so I think it's a new era for us, and I think that we are being challenged with not only doing what we've sort of always done and approached it that way for new development, but really thinking critically about how we can apply these lessons and these themes to projects that aren't sort of a blank slate. And so when you think about like rebrands, is there a different way that we can approach the branding and brand experience process if it already has a name? If a lease up is falling behind, how can we use the tools that we've developed on the nurturing side to bring those forward into a property that already exists, and maybe re-energize and reinvigorate a property that already exists? Renters that may be thinking about leaving, but we can kind of, sort of ensure them that things are evolving and changing for the better so they stick around. Those are the types of things that we're starting to think about now, because the challenge isn't always, and it's certainly not always going to be just ground up new development for us. And so I think, as your business continues to evolve during these times, so does ours. And I think it's a really exciting, challenging opportunity for us.
100%. I think it's so cool when we can, make some moves to meet the client where they're at with their needs. And I think that's really neat. So I'm going to make sure to link to all of your website and all the different things that you guys do. But I do want you to talk about your Saturday newsletter, because I think one of the things is helping people become better marketers and understand the backstory. And you do such a great job on Saturdays giving that backstory where it's like you walk away feeling like you learned something.
Yeah, no, thank you, Barbara. Really, really appreciate that. Transforming Cities is our podcast, and that's been around for a few years now. But we also realized that there could be more there, and so we've really sort of doubled down the investment into building a media platform for the multifamily industry, and it really focuses on multifamily marketers, development topics, and education. You know, insights from really amazing people like yourself, but then weekly takeaways too. So how do you get people involved into a platform like this? And that you could probably take it a million different ways. Where we landed was just a quick Saturday morning newsletter that's a 5-minute read or less. Sip it with your morning coffee. If you're parents, you're probably up before that, waiting for the newsletter to come in. But it usually goes out around 7:30 on Saturday mornings, and it's just sort of like a weekly lesson. Like, what have we been seeing in the industry that week? What questions are we getting? What themes are we tackling as well? And the whole idea is kind of like, here's what we're learning and putting it out as a mirror towards the rest of the industry to say, hey, what do you think? Consume this. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree. Maybe you have your own lessons that are learned. And it's really fun each week to get a few responses and emails from the readership, because oftentimes it feels like the community is slowly building with it, because it's like it's just these little nuggets, these little takeaways that people are battling with across the country as well. And so that's what it's all about. We call it TCAM, kind of the AM edition, if you will. And it's transformingcities.io if anyone's interested in checking it out.
Yeah, I think you guys definitely should, because it's really just actionable. Like, to me, I read it and you have a key takeaway and it's something that you can implement. And I do think that our industry as a whole, sometimes you can't consume an entire podcast, but I always love looking forward to your email because it's pretty easy to digest. It's very easy to know like what's a key takeaway. And yeah, I always look forward to it. So thank you for that, Chris.
Yeah, and there's one other thing I'll mention too. So in addition to the weekly newsletter, we're starting to release a new podcast series called Real Wins. And to your point, long form podcasts are great and I love them obviously, but Real Wins sticks to about a 20-minute conversation similar to your format here. And it really just dives into very tactical topics around the multifamily marketing space. So if anyone's just interested in reading that, or excuse me, listening to that, reading the show notes on those episodes. Those are really fun. They're short, they're bite-sized, and they kind of like jump in, jump out. So definitely take a look at those too.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll link to everything. I always appreciate how generous you are with your time. And thank you for just agreeing to kind of riff with me on this, because I know this is a topic you can talk about in your sleep, but it felt very like so well thought out. So I know my audience is going to appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Barbara. It's been fun.
All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's multifamily mix. Keep shaking things up at your community, your career, and most importantly, your life. Until we mix and mingle again, see you next week, friend.